Okay, we're recording. So I am joined today by Logan Duvall of Sowing Prosperity. Um, he has graciously agreed to share his wisdom with us in our Sugar Shift Challenge group. I can't even remember how I got connected to you, if it was through Petra or Morley, or I think it maybe have been through Morley, but Logan has been on a different but similar journey to mine from a very personal perspective of trying to navigate and understand what's affecting our health through his son's health, and also he has a market where he's looking at food quality and very focused on the quality of what we're putting in our bodies. So maybe I'll just let you introduce yourself a little bit and tell a little bit about your story. But one of the things I want to talk about today is sunlight and blue light and some of those effects, because that's something we both share a passion for. And I think you know the topic way better than I do. And I've just started introducing the importance of that to people. And of course, here I sit without my blue light blockers. But well, these have blue light blockers in them. But I after listening to Jack, I'm not sure how good they are, but they reflect the blue light.
Yeah, yeah, no, there's a lot to it, right? And there's a lot to unpack there. I'm in Arkansas, Middle Arkansas, own a farmer's market, and have the podcast, the Sowing Prosperity platform. So we we try to focus on as local as possible with regenerative agriculture, big time on how do we make a self-sufficient hub of sorts with the food, and that stems from my grandparents who started the market. We lost my grandfather to esophageal cancer, and that was a big, long, hard thing, which is what got my mom pulled in. Because as my grandma was struggling, just trying to take care of my grandpa, and he wasn't doing good, she didn't want the business to just kind of flounder with my grandma not being able to, and so she moved to the property. They got a fifth wheel and started working on the weekends. She was still working full time, and so just that whole caregiver aspect's a big deal. And I don't think that the caregiver gives enough attention for the struggles that you have in that role. So fast forward there, and the business outgrew my grandparents and my grandmother and mom, and so I joined. I moved down to Little Rock's, about an hour from where we grew up, and it just kept growing and developing. And then 2019, my little boy, he was 5 at the time, was diagnosed with stage 4 cancer. So after, losing my grandpa a couple years earlier, then being faced with a pediatric cancer diagnosis, I just wanted to understand, save my son first, right? That was top of mind, but wanted to understand what cancer was, what do we do, how do we give him every tool, and so just got big into like the biohacking and trying to see what that was. Dave Asprey was a huge influence on me early on, and just kept diving and digging and diving, and didn't like the answers I was getting. Honestly, I didn't understand why certain things were working for some people, and it wasn't for others. A ketogenic diet, a vegan diet, a carnivore diet, whatever, fill in the blank it was. And so that's what's led me to the conversations with like Petra, Morley, and you. And I think that we're finally getting some of those big pieces put together, and I know we're going to dive into some more of that.
Yes. Well, I think so. Light is one of the things I just barely introduced, and Dr. Davis actually brought it up as well on a recent Sugar Shift Challenge call that we had about the effects of light on the gut. Of course, I'm the gut bacteria person, so I'm always looking at that. And I, back in probably like 2017 or 2018, when I was just starting to sequence gut microbiome samples of people with Parkinson's, and they had an elevated level of an enzyme called phytoene dehydrogenase, which I was like, what is that? Well, and it goes by several names, phytoene desaturase too, but it's involved in light. So in photosynthesis. And I went to Jack Gilbert, who was my kind of advisor partner from the microbiome space, and said, Jack, there's light, there's photosynthesis going on. And he's like, there's no photosynthesis in the gut. And I was like, I think maybe there is. And that sort of led me down a path of finding Jack Kruse, I think back in 2017, and starting to pick up on some of his books, the John Ott book on light and health, and the connection he had to, showing the difference in the sex of the flowers on the plants and the sex of the animals. And in that conversation, fast forward many years, I think talking to my daughter, whose husband is a nuclear engineer in the Navy, they actually told the people on the submarine that, and I don't remember whether it was boys or girls, but if you stay in the submarine corps, you only have one sex. I don't know which sex it is, but or you have a much higher percentage of either girls or boys, and I don't remember what that is. And so then it got me actually sort of paying attention on our farm to 2 years ago, we had some strange weather and sun patterns, and all of our babies were female. Like we only had one or two males. And I was like, okay, that's weird. And so anyway, that's sort of crazy random light stuff, but maybe you could give people a higher view of light and how light played into what you learned when you were trying to help your son with his cancer.
Yeah, and I was a little later to the light game than I wish I would have been, right? I guess, hindsight always, but there's lots of feelings around Jack Kruse. But to me, I owe the man a tremendous amount. He's helped me so very much. But the first time I ever talked to Jack, I said, "What do I do? What do I do for my son?" And he said, well, he needs a tan on his back because Lander had, he's doing great now, by the way. I don't know if I said that. Stage 4 kidney cancer. So it was Wilms. And I said, what do I do for him? And he said, well, he needs a tan on his back. I'm like, okay, don't understand that. And that he needs to be off of screens. And if he gets a job where he's always on a computer or something like that, I worry for him. And I'm like, what does this even mean? So, fortuitously, the very next conversation was actually Morley. Like I had a 15-minute gap between Jack Kruse for the first time in an interview to Morley Robbins, right? And so in trying to understand what water hose I was just drinking out of with Jack, I couldn't help but ask Morley a couple of the questions that were top of mind. And he graciously dove into that with tying in melanin and how it was produced and how copper was vital in the entire process. And it honestly helped create such a foundation of being able to ask some really important questions. And so from there, I was just trying to understand, what did Jack mean by get a tan? Like, why is that important? Because melanin is unbelievably important, we now know, and it's dependent on UVB being produced, as well as the entire process that does involve the minerals. So this the entryway to melanin and how it absorbs light, it is really important for actually creating energy, and that we have a lot of crossover from plants. So as kept talking to Jack, he kept bringing up, he's like, you're the perfect one to explain this because you're a farmer, right? You know plants and you know photosynthesis, and by understanding photosynthesis, we can understand how the body works. And now on the surface, that sounds crazy, right? That sounds nuts, but there's so much in there. And so this is where I think it's been very easy for you to come in with the bacteria side, because the mitochondria side parallels it so beautifully. So with that, we need to understand light has many spectrums, and we don't fully understand what all the benefits of the full spectrum. So think of like a rainbow, right? The Pink Floyd album cover where it comes into a glass and it comes out. All these different spectrums have a different effect on the biology. So when you look at a day, we have the sunrise in the morning. This is infrared. It's the full spectrum of the red. This is why the sunrise is pink or orange or reddish hues. It's infrared. It's big, big time. Now, this primes the mitochondria to do all kinds of functions, including melatonin production. That's so, so important for so many different reasons. And then we transition into UVA. And UVA does some really cool stuff. And I know, Martha, you had sent a picture of your hand out in the light and your blood vessels were getting bigger. And that was because in the skin, nitrates with UVA convert into nitric oxide, which is a vasodilator. And so it's little things like that that a lot of times we don't even realize. So UVA actually does a lot of really important things, but that being one of them. And so maybe it's not a lisinopril deficiency and for the high blood pressure epidemic, right? Maybe we need to utilize a lot. And then from UVA, which we still have the infrared spectrum in there, go into UVB. UVB is where we hear about vitamin D, but this is also where melanin's produced. And to have properly produced melanin, this is really, really important. I think it's the improper produced melanin or the lack of that leads to a lot of problems. We need the infrared to be primed, prime the body, prime the mitochondria. Then we need the UVA to stimulate the melanocytes, and then the UVB to stimulate full-on melanin production. And so when we have all of that, we get properly formed melanin. Of course, minerals play a role in that as well. And then we go into UVA and infrared, and then infrared, and then it goes black, right? So this cycle is very, 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 very important. And that dark is very, very, very important. So another thing with the melatonin side, and where this is directly related to light, is we think of it, it's like the sleep hormone. It does so much more than that. It is the master antioxidant on so many different levels, and it's produced like 95% is actually produced by the mitochondria, not the pineal gland. And I think that's crucial. So when we have all of these things that are going, everything just runs so much smoother, and it's all dictated on light. Now there's so much more to that, right? We didn't go into POMC and all the cleavages and what all of that does, the alpha, beta, gamma, MSH, right? Like so many different things. But if we don't have those inputs from the sun, nothing works properly. Like nothing. Even the ketogenic diet, we still need to have the infrared light input.
So a few things sort of jump out for me in there, sort of back to photosynthesis. And over these last 10 years that I've been in the microbiome space, but deeper into the science than I was the first 10 years of John being having Parkinson's. Really looking at, so bacteria make melatonin. So, and I wonder what the light connection there is with, the bacteria also getting that sun. But in some of the research I did, or some of the testing I did of John probably a decade ago, he had this elevated metabolite called aminolevulinic acid. And so there's in our body, we make heme, which is involved with hemoglobin. And this aminolevulinic acid is actually in that heme pathway, which is also a photosynthesis pathway. And so that actually, I didn't understand that until I got this big, thick book by Robert Blankenship on photosynthesis and started reading about photosynthesis. And then I found in there, it also talks about antennas and antennas in bacteria, antennas in our cells. We are an antenna, and our cells are antennas. But it was showing this funnel where blue light is excitatory and red light is quenching. And that's where the energy production occurs when the excitation gets quenched. And so if you just think about how we're bombarded with blue light, and so we're bombarded with this excitotoxicity from a chemical perspective, but we don't get the red light quenching to take it through that process to kind of finish out those biochemical processes that are light driven in the body. And so then you get a buildup of, these intermediates that can be quite harmful and toxic. So, and I don't, we probably don't have to go too far down that rabbit hole, because I don't want to get so technical that, people are like, what the heck are they talking about?
Yeah. Well, I think Martha, where we're missing the boat on so much of this is, I think every biological process is light driven, and I think that's evident in Roland Van Wyck's book. I think that this is where it's confusing. It's not something any of us are taught at a foundational level, and it's hard to grasp. But I think literally everyone, now it's affected by other things, but at its core, everything is a light driven process. And you hit on that blue versus red. Even in nature with the sun, when we have a peak UVB, this blue purple spectrum, it's still overwhelmingly red light, right? Like, and so when we have these LEDs and we have blue screens and all that, it is primarily blue with little to no infrared. And this is where we have this massive issue. And we have melanin degradation, where it breaks into some toxic heme proteins. It breaks down into dopamine. It's all of these things, and this is another light driven process that's happening with melanin. The whole retinol story, the opsins, are visual and non-visual photoreceptors. All of it is there for a reason, and I think I think it's fundamentally the basis of all of the conversation.
I think I'm going to agree with you there, and I've been doing my own kind of weird little experiment, I guess, for somebody who knows the light stuff pretty well and knows I should be getting outside and watching the sunrise and stuff. This last year was kind of a crazy year for me, but I started, well, first of all, you connected me with Carlin Allen of Beam Minerals, and minerals are so important to all these enzymatic reactions in the body, and we are very depleted of minerals because of glyphosate in the food supply, which I talk about a lot. I'm working with Dr. Ninham on this paper, and one of the things he was recommending for people with Parkinson's was more omega-3s. Well, they carry light. So the double bonds that are in the omega-3s that, people are carrying on about the double bonds being a problem because of the ability to oxidize and stuff. That's actually, light is carried in the double bond. And that is something that Zach Bush talks about. And so I started about 3 weeks ago. I just take my sugar shift probiotic, my Beam Minerals, my basically cod liver oil, which is the omega-3s, and I'm getting outside for the morning sunrise and outside again for the evening sunrise or sunset, and trying to at least walk outside in the sunlight at one point during the day. And I mean, this is not scientific by any stretch, but I had to unload a full truckload of topsoil after it rained. So it was heavy. And I did that by myself in about 4 hours. And I couldn't believe I was not sore at all. And I was like, I think that this is just this small protocol is like I've given them the microbes. I've given the microbes the minerals they need. I've put the omega-3s that are carrying the light, and I'm doing the light myself. And I mean, I was just kind of dumbfounded. And I'm also sleeping better. So
Yeah, no, that's a big deal. And the master omega is going to be DHA, right? Like this is where like the magic comes in the light story. So we don't have DHA very readily in our diet anymore, and that's where the cod liver oil is also going to play in. But like grass fed lamb is the highest available source that we have, and so I won't go that tangent, but salmon, right? Wild caught salmon. We get the mackerel, the cod liver. Those are some great sources, and helps us be able to utilize the light. And you know, the biophotons, endogenously produced biophotons, is a really big deal too. And this is where the cold comes in. And I think there's some pretty strong evidence that we can endogenously produce vitamin D through cold. That's fascinating. There's still, we need some more digging into that, but I think that is a going to be proven sooner than later.
that's really interesting. And I wonder too, um, so John's ancestry was, from Ireland and Norway, like, the northern latitudes.
Yeah,
And I think like some of the discussions between Jack Cruz and Alexis Callan have been about the mitochondrial phenotypes of people who come from that
right.
northern latitude, which is like an uncoupled
Uncoupled.
mitochondrial phenotype versus people with darker skin and more melanin who come from the equatorial regions. And um, I could never get John to try the cold plunging. I love cold. I mean, I take a cold shower every morning, but um, John did not like it. And I have talked to a number of people with Parkinson's who are either like very cold sensitive. And so I wonder if that's a signal that there's some other maybe light related mechanism that has to be addressed first before
Yeah,
you um, can deal with that. And Ben
yeah.
Azadi has also talked about the like cold plunging can be really beneficial, but it can also be really dangerous for people if they haven't dealt with some of the other metabolic issues in their body. And I wonder if it really comes down to light.
I think it does come down a lot, and I think that there's a collection or connection with the green spectrum specifically. There's a lot in the grand scheme of things. Like green light has like no research in comparison. There's some out there, but there's a lot with pain receptors. Um, something that Petra and I are going to come out with pretty soon is something called the green flash. I know she had dropped that in there when me, Morley, our chain, our text. And what that is this is a flash of green light right before sunrise and a flash of green light right after sunset. And I think you can actually see it in like at the beach. You can see this when you have a very wide horizon and it's not really able to be picked up afterwards. And I believe that this is like a time stamping mechanism. It sets the day and it ends the day with this green blast. So if a 1 to 2 second green blast is that important and can do it, what are we doing with these artificial lights, right? Whether it's green, red, blue, whatever. I think that for me showed how damaging something can be if it's going to be that brief of something to set a cycle. And so, Tom Seeger has put out a lot with some green light. He has a green light machine that it's marketed for like migraines and stuff. And there's a lot of information in there. But Tom also has Moroska Forge is his ice bath company. And so what he's been able to do, and this is why I really think the green comes in, is in doing cold therapy using that green light device that he has, it's a lot more tolerable and a lot less pain. And so to me, this is something I want to dive into is if these northern latitudes may have a little bit higher green light
Green
in the
light.
spectrum. I don't know, but like I'm like high percentage Irish and Scottish. So like I'm looking at my ancestry that way. It's the seafood, the DHA, the cold is really important for my lineage, and
And
I'm not even
lamb,
understood.
and the lamb.
And the lamb, right? And so it starts making sense. I just don't think the answers are as complicated as the science. The science is deep. It's extremely complicated. The answers are super
Common
easy, I
sense,
think.
or
It
common sense. Yeah.
Yeah. And what you were doing with sugar shift and then beam minerals, like Martha, I've cut back so many supplements and focused mainly on those. The humic and fulvic complexes, that is such a broad spectrum and in a natural form that it just makes sense, right? And then with you, like the Lactobacillus plantarum, breaking down glyphosate, like wow, we're getting a double duty of breaking it down and detoxifying with those two. And I think that's a magic combination that I'm proud to use.
Well, I'm actually in June. We're doing a 2-part series with Amber. Amber's Vital is going to talk to us one night, and Caroline Allen the other night. But part of this, when we first finally connected, was just the excitement on both of us, because like I talk a lot about one of my favorite books is this tiny little book called The Life Bridge, The Way to Longevity with Probiotic Nutrients. But this book, it's 20 years old. It talks about how microbes take inorganic matter and make it living matter. And it's basically the microbes that take the minerals and turn them into these bioactive compounds that we use in our bodies that build us up or, break us down. And, that synergistic combination of those two things, I think that's why I didn't have any muscle pain. It just kind of blew my mind, because I just turned 63. Probably the last 5 or 6 times I shoveled anything, I was sore for days afterwards. And I'm just like, I'm full of energy and not sore at all.
Yeah. Not it makes so much sense to me. And I think the supplement aspect is actually, the more I understand, the more scary it is, honestly, because on one hand you have like what Morley talks about with synthetic vitamin C, right? Well, it's an incomplete. We've got to have copper to have it activated, and if you have ascorbic acid, you can deplete it, and aside of other issues. So the not being complete is something that is really something we need to pay attention to. But the other aspect of it is it goes into the electromagnetic side of it, to where the nuclear spins off, and it is completely different than what our body is for, and it can create more chaos, and throws us out of this coherent state. And so, like, to me, this is something else from Jack, is the supplements for us. When we do it, I try to stay for as local as possible too, because it's going those ingredients are going to have the same electromagnetic environment that we do, right? And so this is where I get really concerned about bringing things from across the world and thinking that there's a super supplement for everybody, no matter where you are, when you are. And I think it's so much deeper than that.
Well, and that's also something I learned from John, really, was in Parkinson's over time. Well, to start with, they already have a pretty tight wiggle space for metabolic stability, where like some people can kind of swing one way or the other, and it's, they don't feel bad or whatever. But there's this very narrow bandwidth. And when you start trying to address problems with supplements, a lot of these supplements are like, they're mega doses of things.
Yeah.
And what we noticed with electrolytes in particular was that an electrolyte drink could just swing him way out of balance. And we do need electrolytes, but a lot of these electrolytes are not balanced properly, and there are a lot of synthetic things in them. And you've got a sensitive body, and you start throwing these mega doses of things that either can't be absorbed or the body can't recognize them. So that's also why I talk to people a lot about the importance of food and getting the quality nutrients from your food as much as possible. And that's a challenge in today's world because a lot of the food has also been fed with synthetic fertilizers. And so it's not nutrient dense like it was, say, 50 or 100 years ago. And then people don't think about eating local. And I love that you brought that up because I just say, food is information. Food is information, and it's information about where you are.
Yes.
And so if you're eating strawberries or, mangoes or, pineapples from halfway around the world, does your body really know where you are? And, that was something I really just started thinking about in the last, I'd say 3 or 4 years, but it just makes so much sense to me that your body needs information about where it is. And, that's the local food.
But to me, I think it even goes just way deeper to the where. It's when you are, right? Like that's a big deal. And that may sound maybe a little too abstract, but when you look at the growing seasons of anything, it's a very short window. For me in Arkansas, tomatoes that's a couple weeks, right? That's not year round. And so you're having this photosynthetic input, but you're also having a timing input because the photosynthetic input changes based on time, right? This angle, the spectrum's different. And so I think I know people I can always see kind of like those cross eyes when I start thinking, but like I think the food preserving and stuff is more of a survival mechanism more than it's a health mechanism. So I think that where we even can go wrong in that regard is that in a temperate environment, the winner's a carnivore diet. We shouldn't be necessarily eating. I know this is going to get some pushback. I understand, but we shouldn't probably be having those canned tomatoes in December, right? And that's a win. It's a where and when aspect of this, and I think that's part of the chaos.
That makes so much sense to me, and it's a bit also like the Ayurvedic eating principles in India, which are also very seasonal. And, you do certain things, with the season. And as you're moving into the summertime, you're eating lighter things, sweeter things, because that's, I think about like in Colorado, when I lived in Colorado and the peaches came in and, we had peaches for 30 days and we ate peaches till peaches were like, coming out of every orifice in the body. And I loved those peaches. But at the end of that 30 days, I didn't want any more peaches. And the ketogenic diet to me, I have sort of been looking at this. There's a guy named, I'm going to get his name wrong. It's either Stephen Davis or David Stevens. But he has this glucose 101 protocol, and Dr. Mercola is talking about glucose and the need for glucose. And our red blood cells, the dogma is that they only burn glucose in glycolysis. I think that the red blood cells also get energy from light, but I haven't quite figured that out. But, if I just sort of think about the seasonality of things and glucose, I started looking at this glucose 101 protocol and I was going to try it over the winter, but I noticed within about 3 weeks of doing it, I was like, oh, I'm putting on some weight. And if you think about it, like seasonally, the fruits and the sugars and stuff that help us put on weight are typically available in the summertime, in the late summer going into the fall, when we need to put on a little extra weight for us to be able to burn that fat ketogenically over the wintertime. And so that to me, I was like, okay, I think what this guy's teaching makes sense, but I think if you're going to do that kind of a reset, you should do it over the summer months and prep yourself to go into a winter month of ketosis. And if you look, this was based on microbiome research, but the Hadza people in Kenya, I think they're in Kenya, and the Maasai, they've looked at their microbiomes, and they eat two completely different diets. They're basically ketogenic in blood in the wintertime. And then in the summer, they're eating like roots and fruits and honey and, all these high carbohydrate diet. And their microbiome is swinging back and forth, and their health is swinging back and forth. And they're eating, with the where and when. Exactly.
Yeah, absolutely. All the seasons are dictated by light, right? Like you don't have seasons if the light didn't change.
And it just seems so logical to me, and kind of crazy that it hasn't really been discussed until very, very recently. But the John Ott book, that was a real eye-opener for me, because he talked about, he's the father of photobiology. So, and that also, photobiology also ties into the microbes and fluorescence. And I'm going to tie that in also back to the amino acids and glyphosate and the shikimate pathway, because I just learned in the last 2 weeks that the aromatic amino acids, that's tyrosine, tryptophan, and phenylalanine, they fluoresce. The other amino acids don't fluoresce. So we get those from plants and we get those from bacteria, and they fluoresce, they make light, but they are also the ones that have the shikimate pathway that is disrupted by glyphosate. So what's happening to the light that those are carrying in our plants, in our microbes, if they're exposed to something that's breaking that path? I'm still trying to wrap my head around all of those issues. But back to John Ott for a minute, because he studied all this stuff in plants, from doing the Cinderella pumpkin growing to, looking at it in animals and stuff. And then he found these researchers at, I think it was Sloan Kettering in New York, the cancer doctors, who found that their patients with cancer, if they told them to get 4 hours of morning sunlight, their cancer reversed. And they wrote to the NIH to get some funding to study it, and they wouldn't give them the money because they said there's no money in that. So, is our National Institute of Health supposed to be for discovering things to help our health, or is it supposed to be for discovering things that they can pick our pocket and charge us money for? I mean, that seems just kind of nuts to me. If you could cure a lot of diseases by just getting 4 hours of sunlight, I mean, crazy.
No, I mean you can, right? Like that's the whole problem with
Right.
all of this, is that it's free, or it can't be centralized, right? Like, so everything that we've discussed with food, it's impossible to centralize that. It's not impossible to centralize growing strawberries in California and shipping them grow as many, as big and fast and cheaply as you can, and ship it as everywhere, right? That's very centralized. When you're doing strawberries based on a season at every location, it looks really different, and you can't control that. And so to me, it all goes back to money, and it goes back to centralization. So it's everything we're talking about is like free or it's local, right?
So tell us a little bit about how you've worked to build local food systems, because that's something I think about a lot. I mean, we have our farm. It's not really a commercial farm operation. It's at the moment just for feeding us. But I do think a lot about how to have a local food economy. Kentucky used to be a very diverse, grew a lot of different crops. I mean, it's a great lush area. And nice temperate climate for growing, but I don't, we're not known for kind of having a diverse agricultural economic
Yeah,
variety.
the good thing about y'all is y'all have a pretty strong Amish community that has not lost their way with all of this. But I think that we still even subconsciously equate healthy eating to a plant-based diet. Like I think that we have got to shake that. We have been so conditioned that meat causes cancer, meat causes heart disease, saturated fat is bad, right? And until we break over that, I don't know that we're ever going to get into this really appropriate healthy diet conversation, right? Like that should make up the base of our diet. The other stuff should just come in as the seasons allow. Meat is available year round, like always, right? And it should be the basis of everyone's diet. Like I'm fully sold on that, and this is why doing it the right way, doing it in these regenerative and biodynamic ways is very, very important. But when you focus on having the majority of your sustenance coming from meat from regenerative local farms, that to me is the solution. And we we have most of our livestock ranchers and farmers are very much into the centralized model, right? They're watching the sell barn prices. They're following what is out there, and everything's priced based on that versus decoupling from there. And so this is where we have a network of a bunch of farmers. South Pole is the breed that we focus on, and there's these red cows that are really good on grass, and they're actually developed by Teddy Gentry of Alabama, and Teddy's a great dude. He's been on the podcast too. But when we focus on that and we build out a supply system, the entire chain. So we have to have farmers doing it, farmers providing it to our local markets or consumers at restaurants. Food service is a big deal. It's so much easier to order from Cisco or Benny Keith or US Foods on a button of ribeyes, like a set quantity, than taking a whole animal and using all of it. The ground, the organs, the unique roasts, and skirt steak, flank, you name it. Like there's a lot to an animal more than ribeyes and tenderloins, right? Like there's a lot. So when we use the whole thing, we have the farmers that are able to sell it directly, right, in a local, whatever that means. Then we can start bringing in the other, and that is understanding, right? There's a whole education and logistics distribution part that happens with this infrastructure that I was asked yesterday. This is March, right, or 1st of April. If we had watermelons, right? No, we don't have watermelons, right? Like, and so there's such a disconnect of where our food even comes from. People are scared of meat. They think eating healthy means eating produce, and so those two hurdles we get over, and then we make sure that our farmers can sustain the operation they're doing, right? That means they have to make money and they have to be able to move their products or they stop doing it. And so it's a chicken and egg type of thing. But I, it's as easy as us all just trying to source from as local as possible, and then diving into, hey, let's push for more regenerative, more biodynamic, less glyphosate, less vaccines, less antibiotics, right? And so I think local starts first, and then you just keep trying to get better.
Well, I love what you're doing. And I wish I had well, I mean, I have enough on my plate because I have actually thought, I was like, maybe because I like to do fermented foods too. And I'm like, maybe I should just have like a tiny little shop where I have, local meat and a little bit of produce during a certain time of year. And I do fermentation. And I'm like, are you crazy? Like you've already got like, you've already got like six things. But then I look at you and it's like, you're doing six different things too. So because you're starting. So tell us a little bit about what you and Petra are starting.
We're very focused on cancer, right? Like that's our whole world, just super obsessed. And um I, her and I are just, best friends. I absolutely love Petra. We talk all the time, and we have worked out to where we were doing these weekly meetings where we're going through, cases and seeing and what is new and how can we apply this. And it just kept on, kept on, kept on. And then we were going to look at writing a book, and then the Mel Gibson Joe Rogan interview just blew up, and Mel contacts Petra. He's like, what do I do with all the people reaching out? Where do they go? How do they learn these things that you're teaching? What do you do? And so because of that conversation, we're cranking out a platform to where we can educate on this method that we're bringing in the light, we're bringing in the local seasonal, we're helping people overcome. Better is to prevent, right? Prevent cancers and continue to apply it, and hopefully get other people to do the Martha's Farmers Market, right? Like, we need those everywhere. Every community should have that. And uh, so it just will continue with the podcast interviews, great minds. You bring together so many incredible people. You've done so much. It's just strengthening that network, throwing out the ego that often gets on the backside that I don't think a lot of people see, and focus on the commonalities and how we can improve instead of picking each other apart on where they're wrong. And so that's just what we're trying to do. And you've been a massive part of that, and just continue to learn and help people, because nobody should go through what we've gone through. And nobody should suffer the way that we've seen, and what our loved ones have done. And so it that's my motivation, right? It's just like, let's get the information out there in a way that's digestible, the solutions are attainable, and understand that, like, we've been lied to about literally everything, and nobody's come to save us. It's up to us.
Well, I love that. And one of the things we were talking about was the term biohacking. And that's sort of this crazy trend. But the biohacking is, in a lot of ways, not that different than the pharmaceutical paradigm, because it's, while there are definitely some learnings related to light and cold and a lot of the pieces of the puzzle in biohacking, when I think about it, I don't want to hack my body. I want to support my body to be as healthy as possible and to age in a healthy way. But I don't want to hack it. When I think of hacking, I actually think of a hatchet, like chopping up my, and so I want to start to think about how we can come up with a new term for what we're trying to build in the world and to bring forward with people. And I'm talking to Dr. Davis this week because he's coming to speak at my Parkinson's conference in May. And we were talking about, some of the health coaching and the focus on that. And he's like, I appreciate what people are trying to do in terms of helping people. But he said, when it's so focused on the supplements and the quote hacking, it's, it's a lot like treating symptoms in pharmacy. And it's not about like working on the terrain and supporting the whole human and the gut, which is such a central piece of it, to bring back our health and vitality through an ecosystems approach that's basically supporting life.
To me, God designed it perfectly. Like, we've screwed it up, and so all we're really hacking is going back to nature. Like, that was literally that's always been the solution. It's always going to be the solution. We've complicated it, and we're just understanding what God did as we quote unquote do science. And so, to me, that's the answer. It's just we've turned science into a religion, and we've gotten away from what it says right there in Genesis.
I like it. So people can find you on Sowing Prosperity. Is that the best place for them to find you?
Yeah, Sowing Prosperity, or Logan Duvall pulls up, all kinds of stuff.
And you can find him on Instagram and on YouTube and on Rumble, where his band videos are now. He has a really interesting interview. I'll post some of your interviews for the group when we do this interview, so they can see some of that and maybe start to follow you. And because he talks to farmers, he talks to people in the market, he talks to scientists and doctor, like across the spectrum. And that's another thing that I really love about what you're doing is, you're putting all the pieces together of the bigger picture. So
Oh, thank you. Thank you, Martha. I appreciate you. Appreciate your friendship.
well, thanks for coming. And if there's any questions I can't answer, I'll send them your way, and then you can answer me and I'll send them back the answer.
Sounds good. Sounds good.